Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Overexplained, and today we are looking at 10 new Mak and Dooley items, which is very exciting. But before getting into that, I also have something fun and exciting for the channel here. I know that Capybara has been my mascot for a long time here, but we're going to be shifting a little bit as I now do my face reveal. And hello, I am an axolotl. Well, let's get into the different items here that we have for Dooley first and foremost. I've pulled up the Mobilytics article here that came out yesterday, at least it was updated yesterday, with all the different items that are going to be in the new Dooley expansion. The first being crude tools, and there are 10 that we can see here that are going to be in this expansion. The first is crude tools. It says charge one tech item 1 second. If you have exactly one tech item, its cooldown is reduced by 1 second. It has a 6-second cooldown, and it is both a small tool and a relic. And that relic tag is going to be pretty important for us as we look at some of these other items here. My first thoughts with this item are that, it can be very powerful in a tech build. The thing is, when you normally are playing tech items, you want to have more than one tech item. I can think about something like the railgun, which really cares about having multiple items that are having that tech type. I can pull up howbazaar.gg and we can actually look at that here. So looking, first about the railgun. So we can see it wants to use another tech item to charge this 2 seconds. We can see another item like the arc blaster also wants to be using a lot of tech items to go off, and these are kind of ones that we normally play around with our tech builds. However, there are a lot of tech items on Dooley, so one interesting thing we can do here in howbazaar.gg is go into click on Dooley here, and then we can go click on the tech type and see just how many tech items Dooley has, and there are 47. I mean, there are a whole bunch of ways that we could be utilizing this new item here and finding ways to maybe play one tech item, maybe like a chrono barrier or a combat core, or just utilizing one of our regular cores. We could synergize with something like that, which is kind of interesting. So, crude tools, it can have a lot of potential. I'm interested to see how it levels up, to see what numbers are changed here, because let's say, we're looking at the bronze starting here, and this charges 2 seconds or 3 seconds, or if it reduces the cooldown by more, or it's going off faster, I think that this could be a pretty cool enabler. The article here, and who is it by? Just by the Mobilytics team? Oh, interesting. I'm interested to see who wrote the specific insights on this article, but they talk about like a silencer type effect for tech items, which I think is a pretty, I think that would make a lot of sense realistically. So yeah, I like this item. I think it could be pretty interesting. It's definitely a build around. Nothing screams super powerful about it right now, but again, there are many fun synergies to have in the Bazaar, so I think that this one could be pretty good. The next one here is Dino Disguise. So it's a medium dinosaur relic apparel item that starts at 8 seconds. It shields for 10, and then it has the static clause that says adjacent items are dinosaurs, and this item has +1 multicast for each other relic or dinosaur you have. So inherently, if you're playing it next to 2 items, this thing is going to have 2 times multicast, or it's going to go off 3 times essentially. So +2 plus the actual singular time that it goes off. So it's going to go off 3 times. So an 8-second cooldown item that shields for 30. I'm going to be honest, that's not a very good item. However, turning other items into dinosaurs I think is very relevant on Dooley. Regardless of the items that are in this expansion, there are some pretty fun synergies that we can have. We can go back here to howbazaar.gg, can clear these tags here, and then go to Dooley, click dinosaur. And there's only 2 dinosaurs in the set right now for Dooley, so these items are going to have to do some heavy lifting. But this Dianosaur here is a pretty potent effect. It says when you destroy an item during combat, your dinosaurs permanently gain damage. So it'll work nicely with Dianosaur. And then Momosaur has a very similar clause here. So having more dinosaurs on your board means that with this Dino Disguise, you could really start scaling damage on items that are not even dinosaurs. So I think that could be super cool. And, again, kind of takes a little bit of putting together here, but there are some items in the game that Dooley has on offer that are harder to scale damage on, that but have very potent effects, like a flamethrower or something like that, which is dealing burn equal to its damage. If we can permanently scale that, that's pretty good. Although we'll see at the very end here, Trollosaur is going to do something very similar. My initial take on this item is that Dino Disguise is not super powerful on its face, but it has a lot of fun synergies that we can utilize with it, and then giving your board more relic and dinosaur types just for the sake of this expansion, I think is going to be a very good thing to have. So this is a good enabler for a lot of those builds, but let's keep going here. So the third item on our list is the Dino Saddle. So it is a medium property relic. So interesting to have that property tag. Not many properties on Dooley. Has a 6-second cooldown. It says shield 30. So yet another shield item here. It also has 2 static clauses. Your vehicles have +1 multicast. And if you have a dinosaur, this is a vehicle. So if you have a dinosaur next to this is going to have 2 times multicast. Or if you have a dinosaur rather in general, this is going to have a 2 times multicast. And so on its face here, on the floor, I would say, we're looking, and it's not the exact floor, but 6 seconds to shield for 60. That's not bad, but it's not very good, especially if this is starting at gold tier. The thing is, giving your vehicles +1 multicast is a real big get here. Having +1 multicast effects, and actually I see that this is in the article too, is what they're talking about. But having +1 multicast effects are really powerful, and we can also use something like a thrusters to give an item the vehicle type and then give it +1 multicast. So giving, something again like a railgun +1 multicast or a flamethrower, really any of these super potent items on Dooley +1 multicast is pretty big game here. There are not too many vehicles inherently on Dooley, and again, we can check that. Go here, click on vehicle. So there's 6 vehicles currently from Dooley. Bulldozer, Brick Buddy, Combat Core, which is interesting, that's a vehicle. Crane, Forklift, Race Carl. So Race Carl is a pretty potent one, but really you have to evaluate these items very differently if you understand that if they can have 2 times multicast. So a twice as effective Brick Buddy is going to be insane. A twice as effective Bulldozer. Really the one I think I'm most interested is the Combat Core, just because we know how to play with this one. But there's also the reworked Forklift, which could be pretty cool. It deals 100 damage, and when you use an adjacent item, you charge this however many seconds based off this rarity, and then it gains more damage for each tool, apparel, tech, weapon, or friend you have. So that's a way to deal out a lot more damage with a forklift and things like that if this is 2 times multicast. And yeah, I think that this Dino Saddle could be very cool. It could be something that we don't really see played a lot, but when it is played, it could be very potent. So yeah, I'm liking the Dino Saddle, but again, it seems kind of like more of a build around. But it's not to say that that isn't very good. We can see something even like a card table, which does sort of something similar, have a very potent effect in the Bazaar. So yeah, giving this to Dooley is just another item that can break our brains in a good way. So I love to see it. The next item here is the Dinosaur, which is I'm not going to be the first person to say that's not easy to say, but good joke. Yeah, the Dinosaur. So it is a small weapon friend dinosaur tool. That's really important, as it has the dinosaur subtype here, and also the friends type and the tool type, but mostly that dinosaur type is the thing that's going to be most interesting when we're thinking about this item. It says it is going to deal 10 damage. It has a 5-second cooldown, and it has a static clause that says this item's cooldown is reduced by 50% if you have 4 other items that are dinosaurs, tools, or relics. So I don't think that's going to be very difficult to enable. And this, I think, in its own right, is one of the glue items that is going to hold together the dinosaur build. We don't currently have any. We have 2 dinosaurs. We have a large item dinosaur and a medium item dinosaur. And having a small bronze tier dinosaur that we can add to our board to up our dinosaur count, I think is going to be very impactful. Also going off at like that 2.5 second mark is super potent. So I think that this item can actually be something that we absolutely need in our dinosaur runs, if that's going to be a build, or it is just a really fast damage dealing item if we do have the items to enable it outside of that dinosaur synergy. So I'm really liking this dinosaur. I think that when we're going to be playing in our dinosaur builds, we're going to want this item a good portion of the time just because of how slot efficient it is, and really that effect of, again, if we're pairing this with the Mamasaur or the Dianosaur, and then we can give it +1 multicast or something like that, that would be pretty interesting. But as it stands, I think that this item is going to be pretty good for us, and we're probably going to see a lot of those other dinosaurs with Mamasaur and Dianosaur in our builds too. With that, the next item here is flint stones. So yet another reference. Maybe I'm too old now that I understand where this comes from. Maybe there's a new Flintstones cartoon, I don't know. Anyway, it is a small tool relic, has a 5-second cooldown, and it has 2 effects when it goes off. First is that it burns for 3 for each relic or tool that you have. And then the second clause here is that it says this item, or this item's cooldown rather, is increased by 1 second for each tech item you have. So this is wanting us to kind of play into that tech synergy, but it, and I'll kind of say this up front here, doesn't synergize super well with a lot of the other items here in this expansion. I think this is one that it can go into our relic builds if that becomes something on Dooley, but it in its own right can potentially work. What am I trying to say here? It's hard to evaluate. I think that second clause is something that's very important in that its cooldown is increased by 1 second for each tech item that you have. So we don't want to play this with any tech items. Like that's first and foremost. We really want to play in that relic or tool build, but 5 seconds to potentially burn. And I want to say like, okay, we have 10 slots on our board. If we max this thing out, that'd be 9 times 3 is 28. Is that right? Or 27? 27. So 27 burn on a 5-second cooldown. All right, that is pretty good. The thing is, I'm not sure that Dooley really has a lot of relics. Yeah, going to howbazaar.gg, Dooley has 0 relics, is that correct? That can't be correct, but I guess it is. Dooley has not a single other relic in the base item pool, so it's only tools that are really going to make this work. And there's 14 other tools. I mean, we could put a like Chris on our board, duct tape. Yeah, Hamlet's not really going to be working with this. A power sander maybe, smoldering gun, sure. I'm not really seeing there being a great synergy here that we can inherently look at. Although, you know, maximizing this thing, putting that much burn on a 5-second cooldown is very good. The other thing is that its contention with other tech items, and with Dooley having so many other tech items, means that this might be a difficult item to play. Would you play this if it had a 6-second cooldown? That's a tough question to answer. I think it's a cool design. I like what they're doing here. How we slot it into our boards is going to be interesting. I know some of these items that we've even looked at already are relics, so there will be some relics outside of Flintstone. But yeah, it's one that I think if we can get the numbers up, we can justify it. But on its face value here, I'm struggling to see that this is that powerful. Although if this is the bronze starting stats and maybe like it gains 3 more burn every time you level it up or something like that, that could be very easy to justify. But Dooley, I think, wants items to really kind of ping and synergize off each other. So we'll see how this looks in overall in like a week from now. But yeah, I'm not sure what to think about this item just yet. The next item here is a pretty important one. It's called the Primal Core. So this is yet another core that we can get access to, and thus at that level 3 mark where we select from 5 cores to choose from, this will add into that pool from my understanding. So if you have the expansion, just understand that you also have the 2 cores that you're not going to be shown every single time instead of 1. So if you're going for like a burn build, you are now, I guess, twice as less likely to not have that burn core in your pool of cores to look at. So just be mindful of that. But as it is a core, it is a medium in item, it is a weapon, also a dinosaur, it's a core, and it's also a relic. So yet another relic for us. It has a 6-second cooldown, it deals 50 damage, and it says your dinosaurs and relic weapons gain plus 20 damage for the fight. So looking at all that, you know, it kind of reminds me of like the weapons core, that it's giving more damage to our board. It also has 2 static clauses, and these are kind of the typical charging clauses we see here, or at least one is. The first is a really interesting one, and it says adjacent items are relics. So that's pretty important, again, if we're looking at something like Flintstones. But the second clause here, it says when you use another dinosaur or relic, charge this 1 second. So some really interesting things to think about here. Again, it's giving the relic type to the adjacent items on your board, and it's also bumping up the damage of relics. So we can get items that are not inherently relic or dinosaurs and start bumping up their damage with the primal core. I think that's very strong. Dinosaurs, in this patch even, or in this expansion, a lot of the dinosaurs here aren't really that fast. It's really the dinosaur that is, I think, going to enable this thing the most. So again, I think this is going to be a pretty cornerstone item when we're looking at the new expansion, the dinosaur. But the primal core here is, I think, pretty good. You know, if this is a silver tier version of it, dealing 50 damage on a 6-second cooldown, but it being a core is like pretty decent, just because this thing is going to be going off a lot. And it's also going to be bumping up its own damage here. So it says your dinosaur and relic weapons. So it is a dinosaur and relic weapon. So I don't think it's going to get 40 damage, but it will, I believe, get 20 damage on here. So that's pretty good. I think that this can be powerful. Again, if we're trying to play a dinosaur build, or yeah, if we can find a way to make a relic build work, I think that this is pretty good. I think just the initial damage numbers on this, you know, I'm interested to see how it levels and scales up from here, but as a silver tier item, I think that this is pretty strong. I compare it to 2 items that also pump damage on your board, which is Shark Claws and the Showcase. And so if we're looking at a silver Shark Claws, and we're going to have to clear this. So Shark Claws at silver is bumping up your board by 20, but it doesn't actually buff itself. So it has a little bit of a faster cooldown, but not necessarily because it's the core. So it's on par. This primal core is on par with something like a Shark Claws. And then if we're looking at a Showcase at silver, it's going to be giving 25 and 25. So it's a little behind the numbers of the Showcase, but again, the Showcase isn't doing any damage or shielding. So I think that this primal core is making up for that. And thus, if you want to compare it to anything and kind of try and evaluate its strength, I think the easiest one is going to again be that Shark Claws or that Showcase. And if we're thinking about those items, those are pretty strong. Thus, I think the primal core is going to be pretty strong. All right, let's keep moving here. So this is a very interesting item here. Let me make it bigger for all of us to see, and I'll move myself out of the way real quick. Oh, here we go. Just a little bit in the corner. So, Rex Specs. So this is a large dinosaur friend weapon, and it has a 15-second cooldown, has a lot of text on it. It starts at gold tier, what it looks like. That may change, but from what we're seeing here, it looks like it's starting at gold tier. It deals 100 damage, and then at the 15-second mark, it also says, if your enemy has more items than you, destroy one of their items. It also says, as a static clause here, when you use another dinosaur, charge this 2 seconds. And then the last clause here, it says, when you use another friend, this gains 50 damage for the fight. So this is a really interesting item. It cares both about friends and dinosaurs, which is pretty nice, just so that you can slot this into a friend build. Let's say you have all the bugs from Dooley, you can put all the bugs on board, and then you're going to pump the damage up on this thing pretty significantly. The problem is you really want them to be dinosaurs so that it goes off much more quickly, but you got to do what you got to do. But having that clause of your enemy, if they have more items than you, destroy one of their items. So I want to check real quick to see how Momosaur reads. So Mamasaur says when you destroy an item during combat, your dinosaurs permanently gain 30 to 40 damage depending on its tier. So if you have Mamasaur and you have Rex Specs on the board, you can really start scaling permanent damage very significantly. I don't know that you can really support both of them because that's 6 slots on your board and then the other 4 would need to be dinosaurs. So maybe you could have like the Primal Core and like an Uzi and the Dinosaur. That could be something I think that could actually, yeah, that I think that could actually work pretty well. So yeah, Rex Specs, I really like this item. I'm curious to see how strong it will be in practice. Being able to destroy multiple items on your opponent's board is really cool effect. And it's one that if the Rex Specs is very good, then the meta might adjust to where they're playing boards that have less items on them overall so that the Rex Specs is not going to just destroy them. But that's also something that's pretty hard to play around, so we'll see how that works out. Regardless, I think I like this item. I think that this is going to be a pretty fun one, and I'm curious to see overall how it works out. That plus 50 damage clause 2, just having kind of like different builds that we could utilize this thing in, I think is really fun. So yeah, I'm liking the Rex Specs. Another one here is a large item from, who spoiled this, Mr. Fruit? Yeah. This is a Tanky Anky, so it is a large friend dinosaur weapon. So yet another dinosaur, yet another friend, which is good to know about. It has a 6-second cooldown that does 50 damage when it goes off, and then 2 very interesting static clauses. The first one is a little hard to read, but it says enemy weapons have minus 25 damage. So that little dash there is supposed to be minus. And when I first read this, I'm like, wait, you're giving your enemy weapons 25 damage? I just didn't understand that this dash was minus. So yeah, your enemy weapons have less damage. And then it also has another clause here that says, when one of your dinosaurs deals damage, gain that much shield. So, interesting item. 6-second cooldown on a large item generally is a pretty good rate, given that a lot of large items tend to have some sort of charge clause, or they're very slow and when they go off, so I like that. It doesn't deal a lot of damage, but if we can, again, scale damage on it with something like a Mamasaur or something like that, that'd be cool. But the real thing here that I like about this is it says enemy weapons have minus 25 damage. This is enough to completely blank some builds. If we're looking at something like, I don't know, like a Spider Mace from Mak, then that is their primary way of dealing damage and they don't have a poppy field. Well, it's going to deal 0 damage, things like that. So this item alone can just completely nullify builds that aren't going to be scaling any damage. So I think that that is super potent and super strong and something that'll come up a lot in your runs, and it might warp the meta in some ways to where you have to have some scaling on your damage, but we'll see how this all transpires. It looks like you can also get it at silver tier here, which is really important. It's something that, you know, you can get on your board pretty early on, and it has the friend and dinosaur type, so those are 2 very important types for this expansion for the game. And then that last clause, when one of your dinosaurs deals damage, gain that much shield. So that's super cool. That is an incredibly powerful effect in its own right, because you basically have enchanted your entire board with shields. So for every dinosaur, it just has the shield enchantment, which is pretty insane when you think about it like that. Shielding on any of your weapons can completely change the game, just in terms of doubling their stats, but then you're doing that for your entire board. That's pretty nuts. So my initial impression is that I think that this Tanky Yankee item is kind of nuts. I don't really see a world where either of these 2 clauses are not impactful. I mean, sure, you could play like a poison build or a burn build that has no weapon damage, but if you're playing against a burn build, then all the shielding is going to be good for you. If you're playing against a poison build, I guess, yeah, that's the worst part of it. So maybe Poison Mak is the answer to Tanky Yankee, but still, I think that this item is super strong and one that I would definitely be really wanting to play in Season 3. But we'll see what other items that we have here too. So the second to last here is a Temporal Navigator, so why don't we make it a little bit bigger here. So this is a medium tech vehicle. So it is a vehicle, which is very good to know. Again, not too many vehicles that we have access to as Dooley, and we can give this 2 times multicast as well. So think about that. It is a temporal navigator, 6-second cooldown. It says haste adjacent items for 1 second. It has also 2 static clauses that say if this is your only tech item, its cooldown is reduced by 50%. It also says at the start of each day, get a relic from any hero. And that is an interesting clause in its own right, again, because there are no current relics on Dooley from what we've looked at. So you're probably going to be getting relics from other heroes. I think Mak has the most relics, if I'm not mistaken. So you're probably going to be getting mostly Mak items from this temporal navigator. But let's look at it on our board. So haste adjacent items for 1 second. And I have to imagine that as we level this up, it's going to be maybe hasting for 2 or 3 seconds, depending on the tier. But I don't know that for sure. It's just my guess. It going off at 3 seconds reminds me of something like a captain's wheel. Captain's wheel is going to be going off at actually like 2.5 seconds, so it's a little slower than that. But the captain's wheel is a very potent item, and it's one that really enables one weapon builds. So I see this as kind of like a little bit of a slower captain's wheel, but it's also one that's generating you items, so another economy item. The problem with a lot of the economy items in the game is they're not very usable. We can think of something like the shovel, which is a 10-second cooldown damage dealer. We never want to have to play this. We can also look at something like a satcom, which, yeah, it hastes the friend to the right of this for, that's a really interesting, it hastes it for 2, 2, 2, and then 5. I imagine they'll do a pass on those numbers eventually. But we generally don't want to play a SATCOM. And then SATCOM is the only other... No, there is actually schematics. Schematics literally doesn't do anything on your board. So this, comparatively to the temporal navigator, the temporal navigator is something you can use and it's an economy item. I think that is pretty huge. So I really do like this temporal navigator item here, and I think that just having a usable economy item is super nice. And the fact that it's a vehicle, we can again go and look at, what is it, Dino Disguise? No, Dino Saddle, which says your vehicle's at +1 multicast. So we can give that thing 2 times multicast. I think that's super cool. And then again, we can put that alongside of something like crude tools, and we can make a lot of like charge and haste effects if we put the navigator and the tools next to each other. So that's something interesting. But yeah, I like this item. Just more economy items overall, I think, are really cool. And then the last, but certainly not least, I think that this is actually the most powerful and probably one that will frustrate me the most in the Bazaar item that there is in this new expansion. It is Trollosaur. It is a medium dragon dinosaur friend. So it also has a friend type, which is good to know. And it has the dragon type. There's not many dragon type items in the game. So the Trollosaur, 7-second cooldown, has 2 effects. Deals 10 damage, and it burns equal to 10% of this item's damage. So that's just the flamethrower. This is, well, that's not the flamethrower, but it is similar to the flamethrower in that it is converting damage into burn. The problem is that it's only 10%. I imagine as you level this up that 10% is going to be increased more and more, but I don't know that for sure. The other 2 clauses on this thing are the ones that I think are very interesting, and we'll see how this plays out. The first one is a static clause that says, the first time you fall below half health, destroy a small item. It doesn't specify if that is on your board or your opponent's board here, but I imagine that's on your opponent's board, so that's how I'm going to read it. It also has another static effect that says, when you destroy an item during combat, this permanently gains 10 damage. So if we're looking at it just as its silver tier, not every opponent is going to have small items on their board, but if they do, every time that this goes off, and we can certainly farm the PvE monsters in a way where we can really utilize this to its fullest potential to always be destroying a small item and scaling, it's going to gain 1 more burn and 10 more damage every time. And I think that is pretty potent of an effect. It's something that if we can get relatively early, I think that this item can do some amazing stuff for us. Again, if we compare it with something like a Momosaur, where we're destroying items and then giving our dinosaurs even more damage, I think that's very cool. So this might be part of something like a tempo build, and when I say that, I mean one where we're kind of trying to get it early and then utilize the stats on it to kind of just be stronger than our opponents by a large margin just by how well we have statted up our board. My general thinking in the game is that your raw stats builds are going to win you most early fights, and that is what you can utilize in kind of the early to mid game, and that I would describe as up to basically day 1 through day 8 or 9. That's the early and the mid game, and then after that, the synergy builds take over, and those are the ones that you want to have in the late game. So if we're thinking about day 1 through 8 or day 1 through 9, the Cholosaur looks very good, and then as a synergy item, I suppose it's one that could work really well with their dinosaurs. But yeah, I think overall the Cholosaur is pretty strong, and I'm excited to see this here in the next season. So looking at all of these items, I think that this new expansion is going to be pretty fun from Dooley, whether we're playing a dinosaur build or we're trying to play a relic build. I mean, this really is pushing us to play dinosaurs, but the Primal Core I think is a really cool addition to the field here. It's interesting in that we might want to be playing with the Primal Core just because it's a new item, but we will only have one shot at being offered it, which is at our core selection. So, it's kind of a crapshoot if you would actually be able to utilize this thing, but the Primal Core is probably one of the items that I think we're going to be playing the most. I think Tanky Yankee is also one that I want to utilize, and I just want to see how this one works. I think that this could be very potent, especially just, giving your entire board that shielding clause. I'm interested to see what the enchants look like on this, because let's say that we can put like a fiery enchant on this, and maybe that'll also say when you use one of your dinosaurs, deal fire damage equal to their damage. I think that that could be pretty insane. So I have a feeling that this item is going to not give us some problems, but just is going to certainly be a potent and powerful one. But yeah, overall, pretty excited for this new expansion, and I'm interested to hear what you all think. But let's take a look at Mak's items now. So here are the new Mak items. Another 10 for us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. Great, I can count. I love it. So Mak Season 3 new items here. Again, this is a Mobalytics article. I'll link this all below so you guys can check it out and click all the hyperlinks if that's what you're into. But this is a pretty interesting expansion overall. So before I get into all of these items, I just want to say that they have a unique mechanic, a lot of them, where they have like this level up system or a quest system where you have to meet a certain requirement and then you will unlock a certain thing. So Kriparian, I think, is the one that, did the initial video. I'll link his video down too, because he actually explains how this works in more detail. I have watched that, so I have, if I remember correctly, the information on how this all works. But let's look at Blank Slate first and foremost. So pulled it up here. I'll move myself a little bit over. There you go. There you go. Okay, so Blank Slate. It is it does nothing. So it is a medium relic, and starting at silver tier, or starting at bronze tier rather, it has a 7-second cooldown, and it literally says do nothing. But it also has a bunch of other clauses on it. The first one is a static clause. It says this item's cooldown is reduced by 1 second for each other relic or quest item. So you can put a bunch of relics on your board, and why don't we just take a quick look at how Bazaar.gg, just look at Mak. Let's click the relic button. So he currently has 10 relics, and there will be more coming in this expansion. He has a Fang, Frozen Flame, Femur, Borbora Statue, Philo Stone, Plague Glaive, Sunlight Spear, Tome. You're not going to play the Tome on your board. Thurible, and Viper Cane. So I want us to keep that in mind when we're evaluating relics. Basilisk we can only get at gold. Frozen Flame wants a very specific board. The Femur also wants a very specific board. Statue, very specific board. Philosopher's Stone, sure, you could put that on any board. Plague Glaive, specific board that it wants, and it's at gold tier. The Spear is a very specific board it wants. The Tome we do not play on our board. And then the Thurible is when we could. The Viper Cane also wants a pretty specific board. So the only two relics that we can kind of just like generically put on our board from what I see are the Thurible and the Philosopher's Stone. Those are the only two relics that we can consistently get at bronze that are going to play well with our relics early and often. So just keep that in mind when we're looking at a blank slate. So again, this item's cooldown is reduced by 1 second for each other relics. So let's say we have those other two, so it's a 5-second cooldown. Then we have our quest system where we can meet one of these requirements and then we get a certain effect. So this first one here, it says gain regen 50 times. The next is poison 50 times, then burn 50 times, slow 50 times, freeze 50 times. From what Kriparian was saying, and he had this information from the devs, is that once you unlock one part of these, the others go away. I guess we don't have like 100% confirmation on that, but that is what he said. So I'm going to evaluate the item as with that clause on it. So if we're looking at the blank slate, it's cool that it starts at bronze tier so that we can kind of level this up. From my understanding, this also can get it checks these different requirements if it's in your backpack. Again, not 100% sure. That's just what information I've seen from others. So we'll see how it plays out in game. If it's in your backpack and then you're doing these other things, that's pretty cool. Generally speaking, you're probably going to either hit the regen or the poison one just because of how max items are set up in the game. Or slow, realistically. I think those are kind of the big three that you could get. Poison, or burn rather, there's not like a ton of burn items on Mak, but if we are using candles or something like that, it could be pretty good. So yeah, you're probably going to get one of these four, but realistically, it's probably going to be regen or poison in my opinion. Freeze 50 times without doing any of these other things is kind of insane. And yeah, getting like a freeze item would be cool, but I wonder how much that it would actually be freezing. What I don't know is the effect that these items will give you once they are unlocked. But I assume that they are going to give you regen if you regen, poisoned if you poisoned, and so on and so forth. So looking at that, and I believe that is what Kriparian confirmed, but the actual stats, I don't think he said. With this is a really hard item to evaluate. My initial take on all these quest items, frankly, is that why would you buy an item that you have to complete a quest on if you could just buy a more powerful item that does something similar? And maybe this does give you an insane amount of regen. Maybe it gives you like 50 regen when it goes off or something like that. I doubt it. I doubt it. But I think that, you know, if the effect is powerful enough, sure, I'll want to do it. I think it's a very fun way to play the game. But for a person like me who wants to go for 10 wins every time, that's a hard one to justify. I think that if you like this sort of play style, that this is going to be super fun. You're always going to be having something that you're trying to build upon and a quest you're trying to accomplish. I think that's really cool. I think that if the numbers are right on this thing to where, you know, if we unlock the burn portion of it and it does a large amount of burn, that could be really cool. I'm also interested to see that if it is a burn clause or a separate enchantment that goes on the item. I think from my understanding, it's just going to have a burn clause on the item and then we could enchant it with something else on top of that. So I think that it's really cool. I'm just curious to see what the numbers look like on this thing before I can fully give an evaluation of it. But let's keep moving to another quest item and kind of like a different type of quest item. So here's the Eternal Torch. So with the Eternal Torch, this item is a medium relic. It has a 5-second cooldown. Looks like it starts at bronze tier. It burns for 2. That's what it does. However, it has these other things that we can unlock here. So there's a clause on it that is locked that says when you burn, this gains 2 burn for the fight. And then how we unlock that is we buy 10 burn items. So buy 10 burn items and then boom, this is unlocked. Now we can start utilizing that clause. It also has another clause here that says have 100 burn on this, get +1 multicast. What I'm unconfirmed here is if it permanently gains that +1 multicast or if it needs to see that within the fight. But just looking at these other clauses here, yeah, buying 10 burn items, it's not the hardest thing to do. So, you know, we could unlock the torch and then having this effect of when you burn, this gains 2 burn for the fight. So I kind of think about it like I would the Nightshade on Mak. So this is an item that says it has a static poison clause, and then when you heal or gain regen, this gains more poison for the fight. And Nightshade is a really potent item. So when I look at this Eternal Torch, Nightshade is very similar in my book. And then if I could give my Nightshade like 2 times multicast or it goes off twice, I think that's really potent. And again, we could play this in like a candles build where we do have a burn item going off pretty consistently. The thing is, realistically, if we have burn to the point where this is gaining 2 burn, or where this is 100 burn on it, let's see, we would have needed done that 50 times or so. Yeah, 50, yeah. So we would have had 50 other instances of burn to get this thing to the point where it would have +1 multicast. So at that point, I don't know that that would really matter for us. I would want to say that if this had better numbers at silver, gold, and diamond tier, that this could become more playable with that clause on it. As it stands, it is a 5-second cooldown. That's not the slowest, not the fastest. I think that if we build around it in the right way, this could be potent, but my initial take is that it may not be that strong, just because we have to enable it with something. If we can put something like the Ruby on board, where we are bumping up the burn of this item and other items, maybe we get there. But a hard one to kind of evaluate in a vacuum here. I think my initial take is I don't think that this is looking super strong, but if the numbers get better at silver tier and gold tier, that this could be a very real item. But yeah, let's keep moving here. Let's look at excavation tools, the next item here in Mak's toolkit. It is a small tool item, goes off at 6 seconds. It looks like it may start at silver tier. We're unconfirmed on that. It charges an adjacent relic 1 second, and given that it has the seconds or seconds in brackets here, I'm assuming that as we level this up, that it is going to charge those more. Given if it's at like level, or if it's at a gold tier rarity, or if it's at diamond tier, it's probably going to go 2-3 is what I imagine. It also has a static clause here that says if you have a quest item, reduce this item's cooldown by 50%. So notably, we don't have to have completed the quest. We just have to have a quest item. So this may be a really nice enabler. Having a 3-second item in the Bazaar is just very good in its own right, regardless of what effect it has. Just something that procs every 3 seconds is generally pretty good. Charging an adjacent relic, it's interesting that it looks like it's only going to charge 1 adjacent item. It doesn't say charge adjacent relics. It says a charge adjacent relic. So if that's the case, this is not super potent, but if our relics are very powerful, then that could certainly be something that we are interested in. I mean, I can think about putting this again next to something like the Sunlight Spear, which has a really high cooldown. And yeah, we can get this at silver tier and we have like a regen board. If we can get our excavation tools on a 3-second cooldown, charging this thing up, I think that makes a lot of sense. So this is not something that necessarily needs to play with quest items or stuff in the new expansion. So I really do like this effect. I think that I can compare it to something like the battery, which is going to be charging a single item, and we already know how good the battery is. So yeah, I'm liking excavation tools. I think that this quest enabling PCer is not going to be one that's super hard to enable. So I really like the excavation tools. Just having that effect on Mak is pretty interesting. A lot of Mak builds kind of start with synergy-based gameplay. But they're a little bit slower, and then in the late game we're looking to see how we can get our items to go off faster. So this item I think is one that we're going to be seeing in the late game portions of Mak as they try and get their build to go off a little bit faster. So yeah, I'm here for the excavation tools. I think this is really good. Next up here is the Frost Totem. So this is another quest item here, I imagine. I imagine that if it has an lock on it, that means that it is considered a quest item. It starts at bronze tier from what it looks like. It's a medium relic, 8-second cooldown. It says freeze 1 item for 1 second, and it has the 1 seconds. It has that S in brackets here. So if we're thinking about that, it's probably placed there intentionally. So I imagine if we are leveling this thing up, it might be freezing multiple items. It might be freezing multiple items for multiple seconds, which if that's the case, that's pretty strong, because generally what we see is one or the other. If we level up a frost item where it either gets the ability to freeze more items, or it freezes one item for more seconds. So if this is doing both, that's super potent, and I think that that could be pretty insane here, especially if we're looking at it at bronze tier, where it says that it freezes one item at bronze. So if it's going up by one every single time, we're freezing 4 items at diamond tier. I don't know that that's going to be the case. However, that is one scenario that could play out, but we shall see. And then its quest line here is where it says, the luck portion of it is when you use another relic, charge this 0 seconds. That's interesting. So I imagine that as we level this up, that charge this 0 seconds will increase by like 1, 2, 3 or something of the nature. They're going to have to be pretty careful on these numbers here. Yes, it has an 8-second cooldown, but if we can fill our board with enough relics, this could be a permafreeze territory, and we don't want that to happen in the Bazaar very easily. So I think that that'll be interesting to see how this gets charged. And then its unlock here to get that is we buy 10 freeze items. That's really difficult. There's not a lot of freeze items on Mak. And again, we've looked at the other ones here, so Mak freeze. There's 7. There's Black Ice, Frost Potion, Frozen Flame, Ice Claw, Rainbow Potion, Sapphire, and Weaselpede. Thinking about these items, most of them are starting at silver, if not all of them. I guess we can get an Ice Claw at bronze. And yeah, buying 10 of these items is not going to be trivial. So just keep that in mind when we're evaluating these things, is that if we're actually going to be buying 10 freeze items, that's a lot of gold. A lot of these are mediums or larges at that. So just keep that in mind, that this is a large gold investment to get this thing off the ground. Mind you, if we are buying frost items, freeze items rather, we are probably going to be playing them. So that'll be slotting into our build, but just know that that's not necessarily going to be super easy to do. The other thing here is that we are also wanting to play this with relics, and we've seen that there's not a lot of relics on Mak, and none of these items are relics outside of, I think, the Frozen Flame. And the Sapphire? No. Yeah. Just the Frozen Flame is a relic. So just keep that in mind. Another thing here is that it gains multicast when we buy 20 relics. Again, not a small task to complete here. It is a real quest to gain 10 freeze items and 20 relics. That's a lot of gold that we have to invest. Buying 20 items in general in the Bazaar is very difficult. So buying 20 relics specifically, that's not going to be a very easy thing to accomplish. So I look at this Frost Totem and I say that this can be a super powerful item if it is going to scale in the way that we think it does. And it's going to be one that is going to be hard to enable, but if you do enable it, it's going to be super powerful. The fact that this is getting charged whenever you use a relic, and let's say we did find the scenario where we do have a bunch of relics on our board, or we have at least like 2 or 3, we're charging up the Frost Totem, we can get to a point where we're really consistently freezing our opponents out of the game. So I think the Frost Totem is very potent. It's just enabling this thing is not going to be easy. But let's keep going here. We have another relic notably, so good to know that there are a lot of relics that are in this. Let's just do a little relic check so far. So Blank Slate, Eternal Torch, are relics. Excavation Tools, not a relic. Frost Totem is a relic, and Idol of Decay is a relic. So this was spoiled by Kripparrian, as we can see here. But it is similar to the Frost Totem in its templating, where it is a 5-second cooldown medium relic item. It poisons for 2, and then it has a locked portion that says, when you poison, this gains 2 poisons. And then it has, buy 10 poison items, you unlock that clause. And then if you have 100 poison on this, it is going to gain multicast. So it is very similar to the Eternal Torch. So it looks like the Eternal Torch, the Frost Totem, and Idol of Decay, and as we'll see, the Life Conduit here in a moment, are all very similar in what we're trying to accomplish. I have watched Kripparrian's videos, and I don't want to plagiarize, but I will say what he said and give all credit to him in that this one is going to be probably the easiest one to enable, as he says that it has when we're using our poison builds, we generally are putting a lot of poison on our opponents, so it's going to be pretty easy to poison out our opponents and have a lot of poison triggers, so this might be the easiest one to utilize. I won't say more on it, as again, I I would rather you watch his video and get his takes on it, because I want to do my own work, that sort of thing. So, but my initial take here on Idol of Decay is kind of similar with Eternal Torch, frankly. I don't know how it's all going to play out, but my, again, initial feelings are that why would I buy this when I could buy like a retort and scale that permanently with poison, or I could go into like the self-poisoning build on Mak. I think what's interesting is that the new Mak expansion that has all the self-poison items is going to unlock for everyone when we get into this new season, so you're going to have those items in the item pool by default. So is this Idol of Decay stronger than going and getting, I don't know, something like an Adrenal Converter, or just using the Eludal, or if we are utilizing, and I didn't click the Mak button here, let's do that, 27 items here. If we're utilizing something, I don't know, like the Nightshade specifically, I guess Nightshade is a good comparison. Is the Idol of Decay going to do more poisoning than the Nightshade? That I don't know. I think that's what we're going to have to see how it plays out here. But my initial take on these items is like, again, we have a lot of powerful items in the Bazaar, so how powerful is this effect going to be? It being on a 5-second cooldown is not the fastest, and realistically, we're probably going to be trying to see what it does at like level, or when we reach like the 10-second mark, because being at 5 seconds, that's a little bit before or at the same time that a lot of poison items go off on Mak. So the poison numbers on this thing are going to scale pretty significantly, but poison is also such a slow ticking form of damage comparative to burn that I'm unsure that this is kind of the poison item that I want. I'm certainly willing to be wrong about everything, everything in life. But these items specifically, I'm not super impressed with right now, but I will be buying and playing with them as soon as they come out. So I shall let you all know how powerful that they are. The next item here is a life conduit. So very similar to the other items, where it is a medium relic, has a 5-second cooldown, you gain 2 regen for the fight, has a lock clause that says when you regen, this gains 2 regen for the fight, and then you buy 10 regen items to unlock that, and then if you have 100 regen on this, it gains +1 multicast. So looking at the life conduit again, very similar to all these other ones, I think that I kind of like the life conduit a little bit more than the others, just because of how potent the regen synergies are in the Bazaar. If we can put this next to something like the Staff of the Moose, which I'll pull up here, we can give our weapons damage equal to the regen that this has. And there are certainly some good regen enablers in the Bazaar, but the life conduit I think has pretty good numbers comparatively, especially when we're thinking about the different synergies. I think that the life conduit could also slot into your board with like an adrenal converter, which, as we can look at here, says when you poison yourself, you gain regen. So this could trigger the life conduit very quickly, which I think could be very cool. And overall, I'm kind of most excited about this one. Again, when I look at those others, I'm like, can I just get a better poison item or get a better burn item? Probably. Maybe not a burn item. I don't know. But when I look at this regen clause here, this one makes me pretty interested to play it and try and utilize it and scale it, just because regen as a defensive property, you really need a lot of it to make it more effective. And if we can convert that into damage, that's very good and powerful for us. So I do like the life conduit. I think the frost totem is probably the most powerful out of all these, just because of freeze being such a powerful mechanic in the Bazaar. But if I was going to rank them right now, and hey, when we do our sunset review of season 3, we will look to see how wrong I was. But my current ranking is probably like Frost Totem most powerful, then Life Conduit, then the Idol of Decay, and then lastly the Eternal Torch. So the Eternal Torch being the least powerful. That's my initial take, and maybe I'm completely wrong here, but we'll find out. The next item here is the Macro Scope. So it is a small tool, 7-second cooldown, may start at silver, maybe less, maybe more, maybe bronze, we'll see. But it says slows an item for 1 second. So slow one item for 1 second. Again, it has that bracket on the S's, so we'll see how that changes when it levels up. It also says if you have another relic, quest, or enchanted item, this has +1 multicast. So notably on Mac, it's pretty easy to get enchanted items. Again, there's not a lot of relics, but with this expansion, there are certainly more, and they're quest items here. It looks like it's going to count them all separately. So if we have a relic quest item, I imagine that that's going to be 2 separate instances, or rather, it is not going to be 2 separate instances. So I imagine, again, if we had like the life conduit on board, that's just +1 multicast is how this looks currently. And then this will have +1 multicast for that. Multicast slow items are very potent, and generally we always are going to be wanting to convert that into the Magnus Femur, which is going to see every slow as a separate trigger, and thus it's going to gain more damage and get charged. So if we can put this on board with a macro scope, or we just have enchanted other slow items as well with our macro scope, I think that this could be very potent. It in itself is a fine item. When I say fine, as in not like good, but it's just okay, because that 7-second cooldowns is pretty slow comparative to something like the incense, which I believe is going off at 5 seconds, if I remember correctly. It goes off at 6. Okay. So a little bit slower than that. So if we think about that as our benchmark, one of the best slowing items in the game is incense, and it's going to have all these separate slow triggers. So if notably whenever we want incense, we just like want a ton of incense because it's so good. If we can duplicate and get multiple of these, that's really good in our slow build. So the macro scope is kind of like a slower incense in some ways that may be easy, or that is harder to enable, but it could be having even more triggers than the incense. So I think the macro scope, I'd look at this as kind of like a harder to make work, but slightly more powerful incense if we do. So if that's what it is, I think the macro scope is pretty good, and one that I'd certainly be trying to play in my runs. Another thing here that's pretty notable about it is we can utilize it with, I believe it is the bird, but the covetous raven. There you go. So this says when you use another relic or enchanted item, charge this 2 seconds. Is this? No, this is a tool. Okay, never mind. But it's similar in what it's looking for. So maybe that you have these two on the same board. No, but then again, if we can find a way to make the macro scope a relic, it could work very well with our raven. But initially, I am mistaken here in that, yeah, this macro scope's not going to work with that inherently. But anyway, let's keep looking at the other items here. So the next item is the Sands of Time. So this also goes into that same family of items where it is a quest item and a medium item at that. So it's a medium relic. It has an 8-second cooldown. So the others had generally around 5. So that's a good thing to note here. It's going to slow one item for 1 second. It has that locked portion of it that says when you use another relic, charge this 0 seconds. So I imagine, again, as we level this up, that'll be charged at silver tier for 1, 2, and 3, 2 at gold, 3 at diamond. That's what I imagine, but I do not know. And then it also says buy 10 slow items to unlock that clause, and then buy 20 relics to give this multicast. So again, buying relics, not easy to do. So getting 20 of them, it's going to be pretty hard. Buying 10 slow items, it's interesting. Mac has like this super awesome slow build, but I think that there's not really that many slow items, unfortunately. Yeah, there's only 8 slow items, and one of those being the femur. No, okay. But one of those being the throne net, which we can only see at gold. So realistically, you're probably going to be looking at like 7 different slow items that you can buy on Mac. So just know that when we're looking at this is that it's not super easy to hit this buy 10 slow items, at least early on. You're going to really aggressively be looking at your small item shops. And maybe what you do is you have like a piece rot that is converting those small slow items that you buy back into gold. And that's how you can make this work. But evaluating this, I want to look at that again, how it would scale. I don't know how it scales, but I'm assuming it's going to slow 2 items, 3 items, 4 items for a couple seconds, depending on each tier here. We've looked at those slow items, and that 8 seconds for this thing to go off is pretty slow. However, when we're using another relic, we charge this. That in its own right, I think, could get this thing into a better territory. The only problem with that is we've looked at those relics, and a lot of them don't really synergize with this outside the femur itself. And generally, if our femur has gone off like 2 or 3 times, the game is probably over. So the Sands of Time is not looking to be super powerful currently. If my rating it comparative to all these other quest items, I think I would put it the lowest. I think when I was reading this article before, they might have said that too. I have dyslexia. I can't read all that right now. That's okay. Regardless, I think the Sands of Time is an interesting item, but one that I would say comparative to all these quest items, I'm pretty low on. But again, happy to be proven wrong. Let's keep looking at other items here. So second from last year is Soulstone. It is a small relic, so that's very good to know that we have a small relic that we can be looking for to help enable our purchasing of relic synergies. And it says 7-second cooldown, gain 3 regen for the fight. And then if I remember the Scriparian video correctly, the next part is very interesting. So it has 2 separate clauses here that are its quests. The first one is buy 15 poison items or buy 15 burn items, and then it will get the burn or poison property. And one notable thing that he said about this is that it's not enchanted with that poison or burn property. It's that it ultimately is getting this poison and burn clause. So you could then, on top of that, enchant this with another sort of elemental effect. And then it has another piece here that says below it, buy 15 slow items or buy 15 freeze items, and then it gains the slow and freeze clause. From what I remember, it was that these are 2 separate clauses, and thus it won't lock the other one out. So you will buy 15 poison items, and then you can no longer get this burden clause, but you still have the opportunity to get the slow and freeze clause. There, as we looked at, buying slow items and freeze items is not so easy, and generally speaking, I imagine you're going to be buying more slow items than freeze items on Mac, so this is probably going to be looking at most iterations of the game like it's going to give you 3 regen, maybe poison for 3 and slow as well on that. I don't know the poison numbers. I don't know any of the numbers on this. I don't believe that was mentioned. So thinking about all of these things here, having a 7-second cooldown for those effects is okay. We'll really have to see what the numbers look like on this thing to see if it justifies its place. The thing I'm most excited about this is that it has the relic tag and that it's a small item, so we can buy that for our relic synergies, and then maybe it is charging, like our Sands of Time, or maybe it's charging our Frost Totem, and I think that could be pretty exciting. Generally speaking, I think that these items, again, what are we doing in the interim with our gold? What are we doing in the interim when we're trying to complete these quests, and is the quest worth it? That's really what I want to see here. My initial take is that money is not very prevalent in the Bazaar, so maybe in Season 3 there will be more economy items for Mac or something like that. So we just have to keep that in mind, that if we're buying and selling and doing all that sort of stuff, that these quest items really have to pay off for us if we want them to be potent. I'm not in love with what this item is inherently, but I do think that if the numbers were right on this thing, that it could be pretty impactful. If it's maybe seeing that 3 regen as do like 10 times that as its poison, or that could be pretty good. So we're doing 30 poison for 3 regen. No, there's no way. There's no way that that's it. I imagine it's a 1-for-1 where we're doing 3 poison with the 3 regen, but we'll see. We shall see. Another thing here, or the last item I should say, is the Tomb of the Ancients, which I think is a pretty interesting one. So it's a large relic property. It has a 7-second cooldown. It says gain 5 regen for the fight when this goes off. And then it has a couple other clauses here. It says this has +1 multicast for each other relic you have. So that's pretty cool. It also has quests on it where it says complete 2 quests on other items and then it gains poison. Complete 4 quests on other items and then it gains freeze. What I'm interested to see is that, do we need to have the Tomb of the Ancients on our board or in our backpack to then see the quests? Or is the game going to know that we have completed quests and it's going to track that separately so that when we buy the Tomb of Ancients that this is already unlocked? I don't believe that this was talked about in the video. So looking at all of that, let's start with this regen clause here. So 5 regen on a 7-second cooldown for a large item, that's just bad. That's not good. We don't want to play that. However, if we're giving it multicast, that starts to get a lot more interesting. Gaining 10 regen on 7 seconds is probably not worth it. Even 15 regen at the 7 seconds on a large item, just because of how many slots it takes up on our board, is probably not good enough. But once we start getting to like 2025, that's where I could see this being a little more potent in like the mid game. I imagine that as this thing levels up, it's going to gain more regen. And thus, if, yeah, we're getting to the point where we're doing 50, 70, 100 regen every time this goes off, yeah, then that works pretty well. Just know that a lot of the ways that we are converting regen into damage is in the Staff of the Moose item, which is a large item in its own right. But we can also look at the Soul Ring, which is a small item that is pretty good for that. And then, yeah, the Sunlight Spear, also converting damage into that. It's pretty slow, but it is a relic, which is pretty nice when we're looking at the Tomb of the Ancients. And I don't believe the Soul Ring is, right? It's pretty sure that's what we saw. Yeah, Soul Ring. Yeah, not a relic. So if we have that spear in the tomb, that's 5 slots on our board. Maybe we find, 4 other relics on our board or something like that. Give this thing 5 times multicast. That feels pretty good. That feels pretty good. Additionally, if we can enchant this with something like fiery or poison, that's where I imagine that we would see those numbers, where it would be doing a pretty considerable amount of poison or regen, or poison or burn or something of the nature. So yeah, very interested to see how this all plays out. I think the article compared it to like a Sea Dog Saloon, which is that it has the Sea Dog Saloon is an item, as we can see here, that it gains more multicast for each friend that you have. But the problem with that in comparison is that this is a 7-second cooldown and not a 4-second cooldown. But I believe that 4-second cooldown is at a higher rarity. Regardless, it's harder to get relics than it is to get friends. And thus the Tomb of the Ancients, I think because there's so few relics in the game currently, this might be a difficult one to enable. But if we can enable it, that'd be pretty good. A lot of these items are relics, but how many of these items are we realistically going to play at the same time with each other? Like, I don't think we want to be playing an Eternal Torch when we're playing our Idol of Decay, our Frost Totem, maybe, but generally when you have one synergy, you're going to try and stick with that. Like, if you have your regen from your Life Conduit, you're going to have a regen build. If you have a Frost Totem, you're going to have a freeze build. So I'm curious. I don't know that we could really make like a Life Conduit, Idol of Decay, and Frost Totem all work on the same board. I think you're only going to want to be playing like 1, 2 maximum, but probably just one of these kind of quest items on your board, which is an interesting way to play. I think that is a nice thing for Mak, because with the last Mak expansion, we saw items that really only wanted to be played together in some ways outside of like an Ouroboros statue, because with that self-poisoning build, you just wanted to play all the self-poison items to enable them. So I think that it's nice to have a design space where we want to play these items, a couple of them with each other, but we don't just like have an entire new board or new build that is only these items. So I think I really like that. But my initial take overall here is that I'm just very curious to see how powerful the numbers are on all of these things. If just looking at face value, like the numbers I'm seeing are not super exciting in terms of raw stats on these items, but I'm certainly here to be proven wrong. Maybe there are ways where these items scale up pretty insanely, like if an Idol of Decay is compared to a Nightshade, like this Idol of Decay could get pretty strong pretty quickly, and on a 5-second cooldown, that's pretty good. And then the same thing for the Eternal Torch. So I'm willing to be proven wrong here. Just looking at the numbers on their face, I'm not so impressed, but I have a feeling that in the comments I shall learn my fate to see if how wrong I truly am. But yeah, these are the items that are going to be coming out in the expansion, and currently I'm recording this. I'm going to be putting this out on June 3rd, and the expansion comes out tomorrow on June 4th. So you will be seeing some content here on the channel with all these new items in play. So look out for that here soon. And overall, I am the Bazaar Whisperer. I'm now an axolotl. This is who I am. I was a capybara before, but we don't have to think about the canon like that. Maybe we're like an animorph, but instead of transforming into a human, we just transform between a capybara and an axolotl. So we're very South American based. Regardless, I appreciate you joining me here. If you have enjoyed what I do here, I do put out a lot of Bazaar content, both around strategy, what's coming up, and runs. And with that, I hope you stick around for the next one, and that is where I shall see you next.